of you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. And apologies in advance, first of all, for having to reschedule this from last time. And secondly, apologies that I've got a little bit of a cold today. So apologies that my voice is a little bit raw, but I will do my very, very best. So I'm just going to share my screen and share a presentation that I'd like to take you through. So I was asked today by Miriam and Emma to talk a little bit about accessible travel and my experiences as a disabled person with traveling. So just to first of all introduce myself, I'm Emily, I'm 30 years old. I'm originally from a little town called Skipton in North Yorkshire, if any of you know it, near Leeds, Bradford, Manchester area. And I now live in Glasgow in Scotland. I was born with cerebral palsy and I became a wheelchair user when I was 9. So I have 21 years experience of being a wheelchair user and the impact that that's had on quite a lot of my travel experiences, which I'm going to talk to you about in a minute. And currently I'm head of accessibility and inclusive design at a design agency called Mima, and that Miriam very kindly introduced. And again, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that in a minute. But for the first part of my presentation, what I'd like to do, if it's okay with all of you, is talk a little bit about my life and my travel experiences and really how they have made me and shaped me into the person that I am today without sounding too dramatic. It's absolutely true. And then for the second part of the presentation, I'd just like to give a few hints and tips and tricks around accessible travel, and then open up the room to any questions, any discussions, and hopefully we can all have a really good chat about our own experiences and maybe experiences we'd like to have, places we'd like to go, and things like that. But my travel experiences properly started when I was 16 years old. So to give you a little bit of backstory, before being 16, grew up in North Yorkshire in Skipton, went to a mainstream primary school and secondary school. I'm also a twin, and my twin sister Lucy also has cerebral palsy. So throughout schooling years, throughout education, we always had each other, which I think was a really nice thing. And when I was 16, I just finished my GCSEs at school, and I was nominated by the Special Educational Needs Coordinator at our school to go on a literal journey of a lifetime with a charity called the Journey of a Lifetime Trust, or JOLT as it's better known. And I was fortunate enough to be nominated to go with 24 other people that were total strangers from all over the UK. And we were fortunate enough to go to Southern Africa. So Namibia, Lesotho, and South Africa were the 3 places that we went to. And when you're nominated to go on JOLT, it's usually for several different reasons. Either you might have a physical disability and access requirements like me, you might have had difficulties emotionally in your upbringing, for example. So there's a multitude of reasons why people might go on a JOLT trip. You might have a visual impairment, you might be deaf, you might be neurodivergent in some way. If you have some kind of disability or disadvantage and you're between the ages of 14 and 21, you are able to be nominated to go on JOLT. And they take people to far-flung, exotic, amazing destinations. And as I said, I went with 20 odd other people to Namibia, Lesotho, and South Africa in the summer of 2008. And it probably sounds quite dramatic to say, but it's absolutely true that those strangers not only became my friends, but they also became my family. Even now, even this morning, I was speaking to a few of my fellow JOLTers, and we arranged to have reunions and meet up at weekends. And this trip alone, when I was 16, made me realize my capabilities as a disabled person. I think we so often are taught as disabled people to focus on our limitations and to focus on what we can't do. But this trip made me really focus on my capabilities and what I can do. And that was a real empowering thing to experience at the age of 16. It wasn't without its trials and tribulations. So to the right of the screen, there's an image of a very high red sand dune in Namibia. This was on the second day of the trip, and we were tasked as a group to get to the top of this sand dune in any way that we could. So there was a lot of crawling, a lot of dragging each other up, a lot of guiding our visually impaired friends up to the top of the sand dune and describing the scene and what it looked like. A lot of gesturing to our deaf and hard of hearing friends. And eventually we all got up to the top and laid on our bellies on the top of the sand dune and looked over at the view of the rest of Namibia. And it really was a phenomenal experience. Just to take you through another day during that trip in the summer of 2008, we were told that we were going on a surprise day, and this was near the end of the trip, so near the end of the month-long journey, the month-long expedition. And we were taken to the coast of Cape Town and asked to put some wetsuits on, which as a wheelchair user, that took me a lot of time to put my wetsuit on. And we were told to get into little boats and little speedboats, and we went out into the water. And then there were these cages at the side of the boats that very slowly got pulled down into the water. And we were told that we were going cage diving with sharks. And if we wanted to, we could get into those cages and really see those sharks underwater. And I was so excited by this, a little bit scared, but so excited. And it was something that I thought, wow, I'm probably never going to get this experience ever again. So I did it, and I got into the cage, and seeing these sharks kind of coming towards me, eating the fish and the food that had been put into the water for them was absolutely amazing. And then whilst I was in the cage, there was a really violent tap on my shoulder. And I kind of looked up out of the water, and somebody was gesturing towards the side of the cage. And it turned out that when I went down into the water, I lost the feeling in my legs. And one of my legs was dangling outside of the cage, outside of the squares in the cage. And very quickly had to bring it in. And thankfully, one of them didn't get bitten off. But that was quite a scary thing that made me realize how fragile travel can be. You know, as amazing as it is, you've also got to be really careful and responsible as well. Fast forward in 2 years, I was now 18 years old, and I just finished my A-levels at school. And I saw a poster up in my sixth form lounge to go to the Sinai Desert by Egypt with the Yorkshire Schools Exploring Society. And there was a very distinct difference between the Yorkshire Schools Exploring Society and Jolt, the charity that I previously travelled with. Jolt specialises in accessible travel and specialises in taking disabled people on adventures. And the Yorkshire Schools Exploring Society, in 30 years of running, had never taken a disabled person before. So they were happy to take me, but sorry. Was somebody saying it? No, nobody said anything. So they were happy to take me, but I had to be the guinea pig of the trip, which I was prepared to do. But again, it was a little bit nerve-wracking. And something else happened before we went on this trip. The female leader who was going to be helping the trip to run, who was going to be looking after people whilst they were out there, she withdrew from the trip just before we went on it. So I got a call from the Yorkshire Schools Exploring Society, and they said, well, we'd still like you to go, but you've really got two options. We can't help you without a female leader because we know that you're going to need a bit of personal care, help with toileting, help with changing. We're going to be in a huge desert. So you're going to need help in that sense. So either you can withdraw from the trip, or your mum can come with you as the female leader. And at 18 years old, I wasn't too sure if I really wanted my mum to join me on the trip. I thought it might ruin my street cred a little bit and it wouldn't look necessarily very cool. But my mum and I had a talk one evening and we decided that really it would be an amazing bonding experience for the two of us. So she came with me on the trip and it was one of the best decisions ever. We had the most amazing time. And our job was to cross the Sinai Desert riding only by camel. So that in itself, just being lifted onto the camel and having to find comfort in my body to be able to deal with the very uncomfortable, uneasy walking gait of a camel was quite difficult. Dealing with the language barrier, living with a Bedouin tribe, and dealing with the barrier of if I needed help, if I needed assistance, that was a really interesting thing to try and navigate and work around. And then after we'd gone through the Sinai Desert on camel, we then completed our open water scuba diving course in the Red Sea, which again was incredible, but very, very difficult. You might remember that I said that the Yorkshire Schools Exploring Society had never taken a disabled person on a trip before. So the 15 other people that were on the trip with me were wonderful, brilliant people and became great friends, but they didn't have lived experience of disability. So whilst they were going quite easily across this desert, or they were finding the scuba diving course in the Red Sea really quite easy, I was admittedly struggling at certain points. And I remember feeling really tired, really exhausted at the end of these scuba diving days in particular. But I got up the next morning and I continued and I kept pushing and I managed to get my qualification, which I was really, really proud of. And as I said, it was an amazing experience for myself and my mum. But I would say in general, that trip made me realise that, yes, I do have great capabilities, but let's be realistic. Sometimes things aren't always that easy when you're disabled, and sometimes the world isn't designed for disabled people and disabled bodies. And that was a bit of a sobering thought for me, definitely. Fast forwarding another year or two, I had moved to London and I was studying at Queen Mary University in the East End of London. If any of you are aware of that area, it's the East End of London near Brick Lane. So very, very different from my small town in North Yorkshire. But I absolutely loved it. And I was studying English there and made some really good friends and had an opportunity to go and study abroad in Australia for a year, kind of like a sandwich year of my degree, where I would do the first year in London, second year in Australia, and come back to London to finish my final year of my degree. And I was really lucky. I managed to get on to this scheme. And for the first time ever, I was going to be traveling across the world totally independently on my own at the age of, I think I was 19 at the time. So it was a massive thing and something that I was really excited for, but again, very, very nervous about. And the image on the right of the screen is me scuba diving in the Great Barrier Reef, my pink hair floating in the water. And this was one of my amazing experiences in Australia. I studied at the University of Melbourne. And I just wanted to tell you one quick story about my time in Australia, which relates to travel, but more importantly to friendship, which I think is a big result of travel sometimes. So when I arrived in Australia, I was to be staying at a college called St. Mary's College, and there were about 300 people that all lived together in this college. It had a similar setup to like Oxford and Cambridge, where you live in colleges, you eat together, and you really create this college community with where you live. It's almost like living in a big hotel. And out of 300 people that were also living in this college, there was one other girl who was a wheelchair user. And funnily enough, she also had cerebral palsy, and she was called Alex. And immediately, as soon as I saw Alex, saw that she was the same age as me, a wheelchair user, and I realized that she had cerebral palsy, I suddenly thought, well, we're going to be the best of friends. And for some reason, I just could not get Alex to pay me attention, to want to be friends with me, to want to talk to me, to want to go out partying with me. She just did not want to know anything about me. And I was really put off by this, and I couldn't really work out why. And a few months later, her parents came over to St. Mary's College to visit her. And they knocked on my door and they said, we realised that Alex has kind of been avoiding you. And we just wanted to let you know that you're the first disabled person she's ever met. You know, she's 20 years old and she's been brought up in a really small town, and she's never met another disabled person before. And we think that she's really scared that if she becomes friends with you, she might be seen to be quote unquote more disabled, or be seen to be having a bit of a disability label attached to her. And I think she's really fearful of that. And I said, okay, I understand that, but I still think we'd make great friends. And there's nothing wrong with having that disability label. She is disabled after all. So I kept pursuing and I kept pushing. And eventually, Alex and I realized that we had loads in common in terms of music, in terms of what we liked and what our interests were. And we became amazing friends. And one day we were talking about the travel experiences that I'd had. And I found out that she hadn't been outside of Australia before, and she'd never traveled independently before. She'd been on some brilliant family holidays, but she'd never traveled on her own. And it was something that she really, really wanted to do. So I said, well, let's go from Melbourne to Sydney. It's not very far. It's only an hour or so on a plane. It's a big city. We'll be okay. We'll manage by ourselves. So we decided that we'd go for 5 days to Sydney, and we wouldn't take anybody with us. We'd have to carry our own bags. Nobody would be there to help us. And we had the most amazing time. So much fun. We stayed in a hostel. We kissed loads of boys. We just had loads of fun. It was great. And the real cherry on top of the experience, if you like, and the cherry on top of the friendship was that a year later, after I'd come back to the UK from being in Australia, there was a knock on my door at Christmas time, and it was Alex. And she travelled all the way from Australia to the UK independently on her own to spend Christmas with me and my family. And to know that I'd had just a little bit of impact in building her confidence to travel independently is something that will stay with me forever. You know, it's such a beautiful thing to have been able to share with someone. And yeah, our friendship will last forever as well. So that's just one story out of my time in Australia that's really dear to my heart. Fast forward from my time in Australia, I had moved back to London to study for my final year at university. And I was invited to volunteer as a games maker at the London 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games. And here to the right of the screen is a picture of me with Lord Sebastian Coe, who was a big part in the organising committee for the Games. And I volunteered on the wheelchair fencing support team, which was really amazing. Had never seen wheelchair fencing before, so I learned lots and lots about the sport. But even just volunteering at the Paralympics and being able to talk to Paralympians in a way that we really understood each other because we had similar backgrounds and experiences, that was really amazing. And I met Sebco at a press conference, and then in his closing ceremony speech to close out the games, he quoted me in his speech. And that really led to my career in access consultancy. So in a weird way, I've got him to thank for what happened next. And what happened next was I was invited by the British consulate in Rio de Janeiro to go and speak to different charities and different organizations about disability and about accessibility leading up to the next Olympic and Paralympic Games, which were going to be in 2016 in Rio. You might have watched them on TV, you might have even been there. And whilst I was giving a presentation in Rio to people at the organising committee and people who were part of the British consulate, a man was in the audience, and I was giving this presentation and kind of directing my speech to this man. And about halfway through the speech, he started going on his phone, and I thought, oh no, I'm not doing a very good job here of giving this speech. He's not paying me attention. And at the end of the talk, he stood up and he said, I'm really sorry I've not been giving you my full attention. I've just been texting my boss. I've been really interested in what you've said about your life and about what you learned from the London Olympic and Paralympic Games. And I work for the transport system in Rio, for the underground transport system, and that's called Metro Rio. And what we really need to do is make this underground transport system more accessible for the athletes, for the locals, and for the tourists who are going to come and visit Rio in the next few years for the Olympic and Paralympic Games. Would you like to come and help us and consult on accessibility? And he wanted to interview me the next day. So I went for the interview and I got the job, and I then spent the next 2 years living and working in Rio, helping to build this underground transport system that led to the Olympic Stadium. And also part of that was about training the staff. It was about building public campaigns to build confidence in the public to use this transport system, which for so long hadn't been accessible. I'm sure you've all got examples of buses and trains that are near you that maybe aren't accessible, and building the confidence to use them is really difficult when you're not expecting a good experience. And the same was the case here. So that was a big part of my job too, and I absolutely loved it. Following on from that, after leaving Rio in 2016, I happened to be reading a Lonely Planet travel guide to one of the destinations that I was hoping to go on holiday to. And I suddenly thought to myself, okay, so the transport system is a little bit more accessible now. We'd looked at modernising lifts and putting in tactile flooring for people who were blind or partially sighted. We'd looked at signage, and we'd also looked at what information passengers could get before they even arrived at the stations. So that was all good. And I think out of 35 stations, 5 were accessible when I arrived and 33 were accessible after I left. So there's 2 that I didn't manage to get, which will always stick in my mind, but there we go. But I was reading this Lonely Planet guide and I suddenly thought to myself, okay, fine, the system is a bit more accessible now, but what about places to go and eat, places to go and dance and party, accommodation, tourism attractions? What about all of these places that people will want to visit? Where's the information on accessibility for them? So I tweeted the accessibility manager at Lonely Planet, and this is the power of social media, my friends. He got back in touch with me and said, well, we've not really thought about creating an accessible travel guide to Rio, but it's something that we'd really like to do. Would you like to go back out there? Seeing as you've lived there for 2 years and you know it well, would you like to go back out there and help to write a guide for us? And I said, yes, please. And I went back out to Rio for a few months, and went around all of these places and wrote an accessible travel guide to Rio. And that is a guide that can be downloaded free of charge. So if any of you want to have a little look through it or you're interested, please let me know and I can send you the link on the chat for it to be downloaded free of charge. And that almost brings me up really to, sorry, I almost got through the talk without a cough. That almost brings me up to present day, really. After writing and publishing the Lonely Planet Guide and volunteering at the Olympic and Paralympic Games in Rio in 2016, I then came back to the UK and started building up my portfolio of access consultancy work, having worked on that underground transport system of Metro Rio. And I first started freelancing as an accessibility consultant. So I used to go to a lot of hotels and attractions in the UK, and I used to audit them, give staff a lot of training around how they can be more disability friendly, approachable, confident, etc. And now I work for a design agency called Mima. They're based in London. I, of course, live up in Glasgow, but I work remotely for them. And I'm their head of access and inclusion. And Mima is a design agency with lots of different disciplines. We look at signage and wayfinding. We look at human behavior. We look at user research, ergonomics, lots of different things. But we also have an accessibility and inclusive design sector department that I run. And that's looking at physical, social, and digital accessibility. So the built environment that we all go around, train stations, airports, museums and galleries, whatever it might be, looking at websites and apps and how accessible and inclusive they are or not, but also looking, I think most importantly for me, at what I like to call social accessibility. So staff confidence, staff comfort, the ability to have good communication around disability access requirements, etc. That's really, really important to me. And another thing that's really dear to my heart is making sure that the visitor or passenger experience is also mirrored by the staff experience. So trying to make sure that these organisations and businesses are inclusive recruiters and are welcoming disabled people to workplaces as well. So I just thought I'd share with you for the brief second part of the presentation, a few hints, tips and tricks that I've learned from my experiences traveling as a disabled person. And I've only put a few down because what I'd really like to do after this is maybe turn this into a bit of a conversation. What are your hints, tips and tricks that you've learned from your experiences of disability, of accessibility, and what can we maybe teach each other? I think the first thing to say is it's really important to be aware of your capabilities and use them. As I said earlier in the presentation, I think it's a real shame that society teaches us as disabled people to focus on what we can't do. And that really needs to change because there's so much that we can do. There's so many strengths that we have. For example, when I went to South Africa, Southern Africa with Jolt when I was 16, I made really, really brilliant friends with a boy called Jack, who is still an amazing friend of mine today. And he won't mind me saying that he had quite a difficult emotional upbringing. He was really physically capable and really physically strong. He didn't have a disability at all, but he'd had a really hard childhood. And he was able to lift me and take my wheelchair apart and put it in a vehicle really easily and help me out with all of these physical things. And when we were on the bus for 4 hours driving to our next destination, I would sit with him and talk to him and help him by giving emotional support and by being patient and kind and providing kind of empowering advice whenever I could. And that's what I mean by capabilities. I'm never going to be able to walk again. I'm always going to need somebody to help me with the physical things, but there's so much that I can also give emotionally as well, which I think is really, really important. In terms of making sure that travel is accessible, my other bit of advice would be check and check again for honesty. There are so many hotels, different parts of accommodation that I've booked into over the years, and they've said, "Oh yeah, we've got wheelchair access. Yeah, you don't need to worry. Just come along next week, and we'll see you then." And I've arrived, and there's 5 steps up to the front door, or the bathroom door is too narrow to get through. So I really would advise that whenever you book any kind of trip or travel, check and check again, just to make sure. Give them a call, pester them. It's really important. Of course, when it comes to travel, whether you're disabled or not, things don't always go to plan. But in particular, when we're disabled, things really sometimes don't go to plan and really don't always go our way. What I've learned over the years is that yes, it's really upsetting and really frustrating when things don't go to plan, but there's plenty of things that you can do to turn that on its head and use it as a positive learning or teaching opportunity for the future. So yes, it's really important to feel those negative feelings and to feel that frustration and to be angry every now and again. But in the end, can you turn it into something positive? Can you learn from it? Or can you educate other people around it so it doesn't happen again? It's really amazing if you're able to do that too. And I think the final thing that I wanted to pose more as a question than anything else is that we all travel differently. And what I'd really love to learn in our discussion, hopefully in the next half hour or so, is what's your style and what are your preferences of travel? Where would you really love to go? Where's on your bucket list? Is there anything that you're a bit fearful of when it comes to accessible travel as a disabled person? Is there any stories that you can give of real successes where you've overcome something that you'd like to share with us? What might any of those be? So I will stop there now and stop talking and open up the floor. But thank you so much for having me and for listening. And I hope that's been insightful in some way. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Emily. That was amazing. It feels like we've travelled to many of the same places, and I'd love one day to compare notes of how you got up the sand dune in Namibia, because I stayed very much at the bottom and looked at its beauty. So there's a few people with their hands up, so I'm going to just go with who I see. If you want to ask a question or share an experience, either raise your hand on the screen or do it in there with one of the, what do you call them, emojis, and we'll go from there. But Dean, I think that you are the first person that I saw with the hand raised. I feel like a teacher this evening.
Yeah, you know, Emily, thank you very, very much for your presentation. It was so awe-inspiring, and you're so enthusiastic when you were speaking, and about your travel. And we've had a few speakers, not only on with CP Hub, but I've also listened to other speakers as well. Mm-hmm. And when I speak to people in my CP peer groups and this, that, and the other, you say, well, yeah, that's them, but it wouldn't really happen to me. That'll never happen to me because, well, how would I get there or whatever? And I always say to people, it's about getting yourself involved in things, and wherever that takes you, it'll take you. And in a way, that leads me up to me question: Did you ever believe that you would be where you were now when you were, what the things that you've experienced? Would you believe that it was that you would be able to do the things that you've done?
That's such a good point and such a good question, Dean. I think I you know, I'm just a normal girl from North Yorkshire, you know,
Yeah, I
that
can see that. Yeah.
complained, that went to a mainstream school, that, you know, I'm not from a lot of money, for example, or anything like that at all.
No.
And I think I totally agree with you. I didn't have, one thing that I do think has changed in the world is that I didn't have a lot of disabled role models growing up. And I do think that that's changed for the younger generation. So I remember thinking, yeah, okay, that's never, I would watch a travel program on the BBC, for example, and a disabled person would never be presenting it. So I don't think it was even in my head that I might have that opportunity to do that one day. I really don't think it was. But the thing that I think has really made a difference in my life, as little as it may sound, is that I've always tried to follow through by saying yes to opportunities, however small those opportunities may be. If it's just about going and meeting a new person in a cafe for the first time, or if it's going and being a little bit braver and putting your hand up for something in class and saying, oh, well, I'll do it, I'll take on this project, whatever it might be, the tiniest little thing, I've just tried to live my life by saying yes to opportunities. And that's led me down a path that I could never have hoped for and I could never have dreamt of. And I'm so lucky and I'm so fortunate, but I try to continue living life in that way, because if you're open to opportunities, without sounding too hippie about it, I do truly believe that those opportunities come to you if you're open to them. I really do. So I think that was such a good point and such a good question. And I totally agree with you. No, I never thought I'd be, you know, where I am now. But I do hope that as times are hopefully changing slowly but surely, I do hope that there's young disabled people out there that are watching the TV screens or are reading a magazine or whatever and seeing successful disabled people out there.
Yeah, brilliant. Oh, thank you very much, Emily. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think, Emily, I would concur with something that you said that strikes me as really true. When I was traveling in Australia, traveling on my own for the first time, and I met travel guides that had sort of turned my, well, I don't think I'll be able to do that. It's okay, I'll stay in the van. You guys go off and do your walk, and I'm quite happy to read my book and see everybody back here. And they said to me, well, why don't you just give it a go? What's going to happen? Here's the car keys to the van. Do as much as you can, and then meet us back here when you want to. And it was a real change in mindset that really helped me to challenge myself and to take on things that I didn't think that I'd be able to do, because I'd grown up with people saying, oh, you could try that, Emma, but it's going to be a bit difficult. So, and I think that was a very, I don't want to call it a British mentality, but it was definitely the mentality when I grew up. And actually the mindset when I went to Australia was completely the opposite. And the other thing I would say is that I had never met a population of people who were so open about disabilities and who would ask me constantly when I sat in a bar what I'd done and why I was limping and why I was sitting like that. And I was very used to nobody mentioning anything about it, maybe stopping and staring and whispering, but no one being really open. And at first I was really affronted. And then when I realized it was just because people were generally interested, and once I told them what was wrong and that I was fine, that they'd move the conversation on and it really wasn't a big issue. That actually it really changed my mindset about myself. And in doing that and being more open with everybody else, they were more open with me.
Yeah.
So
love that. And I think that's such a good point. You know, I think, oh God, without getting too political about it, and I really don't want to, but I think we've got to tread a line of happy medium, haven't we? When it comes to people asking about impairments and access requirements, because I totally agree with you, Emma. It seems like sometimes when people ask things out of the blue, it's easy to feel offended, and it's easy to feel, why do people want to find out this thing about me first? Is there nothing else that's more interesting? But at the same time, if it's just a genuine desire to be curious and to be educated, surely that's a good thing that we should be supporting. We should be supporting that conversation, that lack of fear, that, oh God, we won't ask her, but we'll talk about her behind her back scenario that I think we've all been so used to and we've all experienced at one point or another. So yeah, I think it's a really hard line to tread, isn't it, sometimes with that.
Amor, is that how I pronounce
Yeah.
your name? Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi. Hi. Good evening. Yes. I'm new here in the UK, and I can say I'm still learning, and I'm just glad that I've joined this meeting because I came from the Philippines. I'm barely 5 years here in the Philippines. Well, my experience in the Philippines is very different from here. Uh, the accessibility in the Philippines is not as good as here in the UK. And I think the reason why I wasn't able to trouble myself, aside from me going here alone from the Philippines, is that my mom is so scared for me. My mom is so scared for me. She's scared. I know she loves me. It's just that whenever I want to do something, she will go, "Oh, I'm scared that you might fall, or I'm scared that you might not do this. You may need me there." I'm just glad that I'm here now.
Yeah, that's so interesting, Amor, and thank you so much for sharing that. Interestingly, before I went on Jolt when I was 16, my mum was exactly the same. Exactly the same. Before, as weird as it sounds, before I went to Southern Africa, I'd hardly been an hour away from home without my family. True, I truly mean that. I'd hardly been to the next city because she was so worried. And I wonder now you're here, has that relationship and that communication changed slightly? Does your mum
Slightly,
see you
yeah.
as a bit more independent?
Yeah, it's giving me inspiration to do things on my own, especially now that I am alone.
Yeah.
Because I just lost my husband 10 months ago.
Oh wow.
And
Sorry to hear that.
he used to call me scaredy cat. Because which I understand now why. Because as I said, my mom is always scared for me. I know she loves me, but as a parent, she's always scared for me. That's why I'm glad that I met Dean, and then he encouraged me to join this meeting today.
That's wonderful. Well, welcome, and I'm a newbie too, so
Thank you.
I think sometimes more, I don't know if Miriam would agree with me too, is that we've had lots of conversations over the last few years with parents and with people who have got parents who, as parents, you have to kind of cut those apron strings, don't you? But when you're used to having such a role in somebody's life, it makes it even harder
Yes.
to let go. So I think as parents, we all have to do that, but somehow with a disability, it makes that a little bit more difficult. And some people achieve it and some people struggle, but most get there in the end.
Yeah, it's like I know I will always be my mom's baby, but she's doing it literally. You know what I mean?
Okay, thanks, Emma. Claire.
Thank you.
Hello everyone. Can you hear me okay? I've just set up my new computer, so it's been doing weird things. That's my camera comes on and off, so as long as you can hear me. Emily, that was such an incredible presentation. I'm so jealous of all the places that you've been. It just absolutely sounds incredible. I don't even so much have a question, then I just wanted to tell you how great you are.
oh, thank you.
Like obviously a lot of opportunities just really presented themselves to you, but the thing is you took them and you ran with them and you just threw yourself into it, and it just sounds like you've had an incredible life so far, and you're only what, 32 did you say? So it just sounds amazing. You said
that's really kind.
Well, you said a term there earlier, social accessibility, I think you called it. I'm doing some research at the minute with Emma there, and we are looking at social participation for adults with cerebral palsy. And this is not about my research, but just the fact that that's a new term that I hadn't considered before, that it's not just about the opportunities that are there to participate in, it's how society is ready to bring you into those opportunities, you know, including those attitudes as well as signage and accessible venues and that kind of thing. So thank you for saying that phrase, because I've written that one down, and that's really food for thought there for me.
No, you're so welcome. And I think you've just hit the nail on the head. You know, yes, it's all well and good looking at ramps and automatic doorways and all of these things that, of course, are really important. But actually, I could go to the most physically accessible venue in the world. But if I was treated like a second-class citizen because of the staff, because I'm disabled, I wouldn't be going back. So I think it's just about how that physical and that social access marry or don't, as the case may be. And I was talking to quite a famous accessible travel writer and blogger. Some of you might have heard of him, Corey Lee. Curb Free with Corey Lee is a blog that he runs. He had me on his podcast the other day and the other week, and we were talking about how interesting it is that often the places with the best physical accessibility have the worst social accessibility, and vice versa. So Rio, you know, I'm not going to beat around the bush. It was hard work physically to get around and to manage, but I didn't have to wait more than 2 seconds for someone to come and help me and push me across the road, because there wasn't that inhibition that, let's be honest, there often is here in the UK. That yes, there might be good physical accessibility, but sometimes we're a bit hush hush and, oh, we don't know what to do, so let's not do anything at all. So I think that's a really interesting thing to look at in terms of participation as well.
Absolutely.
I think we raised this.
Enjoyed that.
Carrie Ann raised this last time she came and spoke, and she was talking about venues that help you, even if they're not the best. They're the ones you're going to go back to, not the ones that perhaps pertain to be the most disabled friendly, or whatever term that they use. So it's nice to have a label to talk about that, because we've all been describing it for the last few weeks, I think, whilst we've been talking about travel, but we haven't had a word to actually label what we were talking about. So it's really useful. Jamie, did you want to say something? Oh, you're still on mute, guys.
Sorry.
It's okay. Hi.
Sorry. Hi. That was absolutely brilliant. Someone's just phoned. Has anybody else got their hand up? Can we?
Yes, I'll come back to you. Don't worry. Janin, is that how I pronounce your name? I apologise if it's wrong. Sorry. Hi. Nice to meet you.
Hi. Yeah, your talk was amazing. Thank you for giving that. My sister actually lives in Brazil. So
wow.
Yeah, she isn't disabled, but she lives in Brazil. And she'd quite like me to go out there at some point, but I'm quite scared.
You'll be fine. Do it. Say yes.
Yeah. So do you have the link to that travel guide? I mean, she's not in Rio, she's in Sao Paulo, but
yes,
I'd be really
absolutely
interested to see that.
I'm going to link you in the chat now.
You haven't done any work in Sao Paulo, have you?
I haven't. No, I was there for a layover and that's it, I'm afraid. Sorry. But I've heard it's really cool. I've heard it's kind of like a Brazilian New York. Has your sister said that?
I don't think she has said that, but that's interesting. Yeah, I guess some of the pictures she sent and that, I can see why you might say that.
Yeah. Oh, you'll have a great time. Go for it. I'm just posting it to the chat now, and hopefully that'll work.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
So does anybody else have some stories to share about their successes traveling, or their issues and how they got over it? I don't know if anybody else wants to share. It's all going a bit quiet, Emily. We're all stunned at all the things that you've done and achieved. I know that Claire in the chat was talking about the attitudes being the same in the workplace as those that we that we experience when we're out and about in different venues and things.
I think that's
Can I just ask a question? Just carrying on from also Carrie Ann's talk, one of the things that as you've done quite a lot of airport experience yourself, one of the things, some people have had some bad experiences regarding their equipment, you know, in airports, etc., and wondered if you'd had any anything you'd like to share about it, and any tips.
Okay, so I am aware that there are a lot of conversations going on at the moment, people campaigning for especially wheelchair users to be able to bring their wheelchairs onto the flight with them. So I think that that is kind of progressing at quite a pace. When it will happen in terms of infrastructure of the planes, I really don't know, but it's interesting that the talks are happening and seem to be gaining a little bit of momentum. Touch wood, I've never had any damage to my chair. However, I have had quite a few bad experiences whilst in the air. One of them being, I was on a 7-hour flight from the UK to Dubai about 5 years ago, something like that. And did the typical thing that I'm sure lots of us do of dehydrating ourselves a little bit before we get on the plane to try and eke it out a little bit longer so you don't have to use the in-flight toilet because it's hard work. And got to about 4 hours in the flight, so about halfway there, and I thought, I can't hold it any longer, I really need a wee. So I called the staff button, and somebody came along to ask me what I required. And I said, oh, can I have the in-flight aisle chair, please? I just need to go and use the toilet. I'm really sorry, we don't have an in-flight wheelchair on board today. So bearing in mind, I had another 4 hours of the flight to go. I had to crawl down the whole length of the plane, everybody staring at me and gasping and whatever, to then use the toilet and crawl back again. So that wasn't the greatest experience. And then the cherry on the top of that was when I arrived in Dubai, another member of staff came up with the in-flight wheelchair and said, here you go. So it just so happened that that one member of staff that happened to come and assist me at the beginning didn't have the correct training of knowing where that in-flight wheelchair was. So when I say check and check again, I need to follow that as well. So yeah, that was one of those experiences that I won't forget in a while for sure. But fingers crossed, touch wood, nothing to do with no real damage to my chair. There's been times when, you know, a screw's been a bit loose on my foot plate or my brake or something like that, but nothing like the horror stories that you hear sometimes.
But I think what's really useful about that is that it just reinforces to me that we need to take ownership of our journeys, and we need to. And this is one of the reasons why we want to do the travel blog, is because sometimes we don't even know the questions to ask.
Yeah.
And actually, it can make such a big difference to our own. I think anxiety is a bit of a strong word, but our concerns about traveling, that actually the more information we have and questions we have to think about and to, like you say, check, it helps us know that we're preparing ourselves as best as possible. So thank you for that story, because it's really useful.
We'll check in with Jamie and see if Emma's back. Jamie, is Emma back?
Can I just say something?
Sure you can, Shard.
You're really inspirational, by the way, Emily.
Thank you, that's very kind, and it's such a pleasure to be here with you all tonight, so thank you.
Right, I'm back. I'm sorry about that. A bit too much there. Right. He's saying he knows it's not the same as what you've done, Emily, but he loves what you do, and it's really been really interesting listening.
Thanks, Jamie.
Your story. 8 years ago, Jamie didn't have a communication device, But now he's got one, and didn't really go anywhere ever without anyone. And now he can go on the train, on a bus, and he goes on his own. And even if that means the wheelchair breaking down in the middle of the barriers at King's Cross Station on his own, and he had to phone me. And I had to say to the train staff, get the motor, get the wire of the motor, just wiggle it about a bit. There's a bit of a loose connect. They couldn't do it. They had to send him home on the train. And you think it's important to show people that disabled people half about ramps and more about attitude, saying that it's a lot of it is about ramps and access, but there's more about attitude and willingness to improve. You think?
So true, Jamie. I couldn't agree with you more. And I would love to know more about how things have changed since you've got your assistive technologies. I think that's so interesting. So often we've got to train people that wheelchairs, for example, aren't restrictive bits of equipment. They're freedom giving devices. And I think it's probably very similar from what you're saying, but couldn't agree with you more around kind of physical environment versus attitudes.
If you want any, he's saying that if you want to hear Jamie's talk, he's got a talk. When is it? Wait, 13th of July. James, he's doing it. Who's it for? He's doing it for a bunch of students. He's doing his talk on the 30th of July.
I would love that.
Okay, well, should we make some contact somehow?
I would really love that. Thank you so much. I really would.
Contact through Emma and Miriam, possibly.
Well, I'll tell you what I will do, everybody, Emma and Miriam, if you're happy with this, for me to just put my email in the chat. Is that okay with you both?
Of course.
Absolutely.
Tell you what, I'll do
Emma
that,
and
then Jamie, we can chat.
Emma and Jamie, please send it through to us as well.
Okay.
So
yeah, sure. Yeah,
it'd be lovely to, share it on the Facebook group if you want as well.
It's not an open chat for everyone in the world.
Oh right, okay, that's fine then.
Selected nice people can come along. Anyone who's in this. Well, we know we're a safe bunch, aren't we, on this sort of group? But if you want, we can. Jamie's saying he can do it for this.
Brilliant. We'll get in touch, Jamie.
We'll be in
most
touch
definitely.
Amazing.
Definitely. Emily, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about your experience with your friend Alex and her initial reluctance to be seen with you, because I definitely had a person in my life as I grew up who was in the same friendship crowd as me but would never talk to me because he didn't want to be seen as somebody with CP just like me, and it was just really interesting to hear that you'd had that similar experience. Sometimes we all have experiences and think they're unique to us, don't you? And then you hear somebody else and you're like, wow, that also happened to them. And as I got older that I realised that it was his issue, not my issue. That was really interesting.
Totally. And I think, I've had those experiences with non-disabled people before, but I never had it before with another disabled person. So I just wasn't really prepared for it. But when Alex's parents explained to me that she hadn't really engaged with other disabled people before, never really met other disabled people before. I understand that without that education and without that communication, it does feel a bit weird. And, you know, admittedly, people are going to stare at 2 wheelchair users on the street more than they're going to stare at one. I think that's just, you know, law of averages, isn't it? More than anything. So I understand where all of that came from. I really do. But I'm really glad that we were able to get to the other side of it. And now Alex, she, you know, extremely crazy bright girl. She's a lawyer that specializes in disability law. And she's really kind of turned that corner to see, to I guess, reclaim her disabled identity, see it as very empowering. And yeah, again, to just have had a part in that, I think was a really amazing thing to have experienced.
Dean wants to come back in.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. Emma. Yeah, just wanted to sort of say regarding what you said, Emily, about checking things and, you know, things not being accessible and things. I mean, when Mum and I go to Spain, when we go to Spain, we stay in these apartments and they're on the front, and there used to be about 20, but now there's about half that because some of them are being bought. Sadly, not by us. The thing is, Mum's always explained to the hotel where we stayed. It wasn't a package holiday. You know, we booked. You know, we booked to the hotel directly and our flight separately. And we always said, my mum said to the hotel, you know, she explained about me, about my disability, and they said, "All right, we'll make sure that, you know, make sure that your son's as near as possible, and you know, to like the first flat, that first apartment that's available." And they always make a point of giving me the, you know, the first one that's generally available. It's either that apartment we stay on or the next 2. So make people aware of that, you know, make people aware of your needs. I think that's what I'm saying to people. You know, it's just about, because these places aren't, you know, they're not psychic, you know, they don't know, you know, and but I appreciate sometimes it is difficult, you know, to you know, there's so many things when you're traveling, and especially if you have issues, access issues, like additional needs, you know. So, you know, but I just started off at that anyway.
Yeah, great point, Dean. And I think it you know, talking about social accessibility and the importance of, you know, visitor and staff member having that kind of equal communication and feeling comfortable and confident, that can only happen when, yes, the staff member is kind and considerate and approachable and has good training and awareness, but it can also only happen for the staff member when they're aware of what that visitor needs, which is exactly what you've just said. I think so often we expect staff members to be mind readers and really just know everything about us as individuals, which is unfair. What we can do to help them is provide them with the information that they require. So I think that's such a good point. Thank you.
Claire, did you want to come in and talk about the point that you made in the chat, or are you just happy to leave it there? Oh.
Yeah, I could. Yeah, I was saying it was an interesting, my experience growing up. You know, when you were talking about Alex, in a way, it was sort of the other way round. A lot of my friends at school and university, especially, a lot of the disabled friends, apart from Janine here, were a lot more severe and more dependent than me. So whilst my family, my parents especially, sort of encouraged me to do as much as I could and sort of, you know, included as much as tried to treat me sort of the same as my brother and sister, at times at school and college, I felt a bit sort of held back, if you like. But equally, amongst able-bodied friends, like you were saying about your second holiday, I would struggle.
Yeah.
So it's always been a bit of a difficult balance. And I think as I've got older, I think I've learned it's important to have a bit of both. So yes, I do need my disabled friends so that we can talk about our experiences and challenges, if you like. But equally, I need some things I can do where I can be a bit more have a bit more freedom, if you like.
Yeah, I think that's so
Bit of
beautiful.
both,
put.
yeah.
I think that's just brilliantly put. And my a really, really good friend of mine, in fact, the CEO of Enhance the UK, Jenny, I don't know if you met her or if she's spoken to you guys
Yeah.
before. She's hard of hearing. She quite often makes the joke of, I'm not hearing, but I'm not deaf with a capital D.
I'm the same.
So where do I fit? You know, where I can't really go to a deaf club where they're all signing really fast and I can't really keep up, but I couldn't go to a really dark nightclub with loads of hearing friends and expect to keep up with the conversation. So I think
I'm exactly the same, but both from a wheelchair perspective and a deaf perspective, it's the same. Because I used to be a competitive swimmer, and my coach at one time said, "Oh, you could join the deaf swim club, deaf swim team," and I was like, "Yeah, but I don't sign," you know, because most of the time when we're swimming swim competitions, I'd have my hearing aids out, so I'd probably miss what teammates were saying, so I could see where she got the idea from. And like you said, it's like, but I don't sign. I'm not the same as a profoundly deaf person. But yeah, it's the same with the chair stuff.
Yeah.
In a way, when you talk about my abilities, you know, I'm quite independent, but yeah, not as, but not completely independent. So it's a tricky balance.
Yeah, beautifully put. I think that's a really good thing to be aware of, and I guess we could spin that beautifully to say, isn't it amazing that we can be part of both of those things?
Yeah, exactly. That's why I always like to sort of, I'm the same as you. I like to join in with as much, but also take the opportunity to educate if required. Because like you said, it's not fair if we don't actually tell them about our needs, especially teaching people that we're all different. Because sometimes people say, "Oh yeah, I know about that condition," but actually the other person they've known with that condition is completely different to you, and you know, teaching people to learn and learn about the individual, I think, is a really important thing, especially with CP, because it's such a broad spectrum condition.
And do you think that it's also about ourselves? So we've had a lot of conversations about changing our perception of mobility aids as equipment to help us to do things and to be included, rather than those things that make us different or that are necessarily a bad thing, that actually they're quite empowering. And I know we were following Rosie Jones when she went out to commentate on the games, and that she had a wheelchair for the first time, and how she suddenly realized that actually this gave her a lot more freedom. And it's something we've been talking about over the last few years quite a lot, and I think it's also about our own feelings about things too, as well as changing the attitudes of the outside world.
Yeah, very true, very true. I seem to remember following Rosie as well, Emma, and she gave a chair a name, didn't she? Or
yeah, she did.
Maureen. Maureen, perfect. And I think you're so right. Yes, society's opinion is one thing, but actually, I mean, another thing that we could talk about is, you've probably seen in the news recently that there was a big thing about the Queen being in a lot of pain and not wanting to use a wheelchair and be seen out in public, and how that almost like continues those stereotypes of mobility equipment equals vulnerability. And yeah, I think it's about changing society's opinion, but also looking internally, like you said, to see where you really place yourself.
If you makes you feel
Just to
any
let
better.
you know, Emily, when that came out about the Queen, I did actually suggest that we invite her to our sessions to try and you know, teach her the positives of having a wheelchair. I said, well, can we get the Queen here, you know?
Well, we tried. We went up to Parliament to meet a few people, and I did mention it that wouldn't it be, because they were practicing for the state opening of Parliament, and they were hoping the Queen was going to come, but the conversation was that she probably wouldn't because she'd have to do it in a wheelchair. And I said, wouldn't that be fantastic? But obviously she didn't take me up on my suggestion, but I think you're not the only one that thought that, Emily. There's a couple more people that want to get in before we finish. Becky, I think you had your hand up next.
Yeah, I was just thinking kind of back what Claire was saying about the balancing act and what Emily was talking about right at the beginning. I think it was it the Sinai trip where you started sort of experiencing fatigue and stuff? Yeah. Because theoretically I'm relatively able and I should be able to walk a lot on holiday and do a lot of things, but actually if I do that I then start missing stuff because I'm too knackered and I spend my time walking to places and concentrating on the walking and not looking at the view or doing other things. Or like if I went somewhere independently, then it would be a lot more effort than if I take someone with me and things like that. So I just wondered whether you'd had much more experience of that or how you'd got over that, if that was an issue you'd had.
Oh, I'm learning so much from all of you. Like the visual that I got from what you just said there, Becky, was so good. Like the visual of being able to take things in your stride and take things in and actually have enjoyment versus use all your energy up and not actually feel like you're away on a leisure trip at all. I feel that so much and I don't have an answer. I don't have an answer for you. It's definitely not something that I've got over necessarily. I see huge positives to traveling both on my own and with someone else. I think with someone else is exactly what you've just said, you know, being able to really soak things up and enjoy things. However, I do feel a real sense of accomplishment traveling on my own, even if things take longer, even if I don't manage to get in all the sightseeing that I want to do, or I've got to choose one thing instead of three. I think there is still a real place of achievement with that. But I absolutely agree with you. It's about creating a happy medium somewhere along that line between exhaustion and enjoyment. And there's no point doing things if it's just not enjoyable. What's the point? So I really loved what you said there, and that visual that was really powerful. Thank you.
And Maddie.
But I just wanted to kind of go back to getting that balance and kind of finding what you do and you might not do because of how you're feeling or whatever, and kind of being in an in-between stage. I've found all the way throughout my life I was always raised to kind of get on with everything and not see myself as different to anybody else, which I am quite thankful for. But actually only in recent years, maybe in the last 5 years, I've realized it's okay to have a walking stick, or to say no, or to say actually I will do this but I will need this, and kind of learning how to communicate that with the ways in which society might view that. So I myself viewed that if I had a walking stick I would be different, people would look at me weird, I shouldn't have it, I'm absolutely fine. And going back to like travel and things, there's been loads of situations, particularly I go to a lot of gigs, and like getting around London on the train, it's all fine, but actually really I've used my stick for a visible aid for everybody else to see that actually I might need a seat or anything like that. And it's kind of just, I don't know, I'm still exploring that kind of in between stage of how I identify as a disabled person, and then what I actually might need for myself, and not just trying to get on with things, but equally doing everything I possibly can because that's what I want to do. So it's just really interesting to hear everything you've done, because a lot of the time I might have said to myself, or say my mum when I was a kid would have said to me like, oh, maybe you shouldn't do that because of X, Y and Z, or you might struggle with that, so maybe not. So yeah, it's just really interesting because I feel like I'm on a bit of a journey, just trying to figure out what I need for myself and my hobbies and what I want to do. So
thank you for that, Maddie. So powerful, and I absolutely resonate everything that you said. Up until a couple of years ago, I was a massive victim and a massive player of this hustle culture. So this idea that in order to be successful, God, you had to be working all the time and showing everyone how much you're working, and just basically running yourself into the ground with exhaustion. And I've only learned in the past few years, like, how important and valuable and productive it is to rest. Like, that's been a massive thing for me. So everything that you just said there really resonates from that point of view. I also wonder, Maddie, have you heard of the spoon theory at all? And is that something that you know? Oh, okay. I hear you laugh.
No, we
guessing
have.
yes.
We know it really well.
Theory, although I did see a post on Instagram earlier about something to do with spoons in Glastonbury and people watching Glastonbury from home. So maybe that's the similar thing. I don't really know.
Oh, okay, interesting. I will look at that.
Yeah.
And also to just quickly say, Maddie, like, if you want to chat at any point throughout that journey, feel free to get in touch, even if it's just to have an ear.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And I would just add, Maddie, that we've had lots of people with stories just like you. I can completely relate to the overworking, to show that I'm successful, and that the positivity of rest, and to actually own what you can and you can't do, and then that's okay at that particular time, and that changes. So I really hear that story too. We have got Emily for the last 5 minutes. Does anybody else have anything that they want to say? Well, then I'm going to fill the silence as usual, and say thank you so much for coming. It was a really, really inspiring, even though I don't like usually using the word inspiring, but a very relatable talk, and thank you very much. And I think that it's taught me, at least, and I hope other people, that things are possible. And sometimes it's about changing our environment and our society, and sometimes it's about changing ourselves and our belief in ourselves. So thank you very, very much.